Welcome to Module 8. This module introduces us to the essential steps in designing a quantitative methodology for your research project. Many of you may have already been using the information in this chapter to help you create a survey or an interview instrument. In this chapter, you will learn the essential components of a methods section in a proposal for a survey and an interview instrument. Remember that quantitative research tends to use surveys or other data that can be measured numerically to give us the what of research, in contrast to the qualitative research, which tends to give us the why. I understand that not all of you are going to use a quantitative methodology for your research proposal. However, it's still vital that you understand the different types of research out there. If you are using quantitative methodology, this chapter is where you should dedicate the most time. Dig in and really try to understand each piece. Let's begin by defining surveys and experiments. A survey design provides a quantitative or a numeric description of the trends, attitudes, or opinions of a population by studying a sample of that population. Of course, it would be nearly impossible for you to survey your entire population, so using a sample of people can allow researchers to draw generalizations and inferences from the results of the sample. Experimental designs differ in that they test the impact of a treatment on an outcome while controlling all other factors that might have an influence on the outcome. While a sample may still be used to generalize a population, that is not the sole intention of the design. Let me give you an example of both a survey design and an experimental design. In a survey design, I might be looking to give out a survey that asks the population how they would rate the conditions of the work environment using a 5-point Likert scale that maybe emphasizes things from a strongly agree range to a strongly disagree range. In an experimental design, I might have a drug trial where I ask several participants to take a medication while the other group gets a placebo. Neither group would actually know which they got, but all would receive the exact same conditions other than the treatment. When writing a research methodology using a survey design, you can begin this research chapter with a basic purpose and rationale for the survey. This discussion would identify the purpose of the survey research, indicate why you used a survey for your data collection, talk about whether or not the survey will be cross-sectional or longitudinal, and finally, specify how you plan to collect the data. This could be by email, telephone, mail, personal interviews that ask participants to rank things, or even through group administration, such as you asking a principal to distribute the survey to teachers underneath them. In a survey design, you will need to explicitly identify the population of the study, including the size and how you chose those individuals to be a part of the study. This could be a single-stage sample or a multi-stage sample. Either way, you want to be clear and upfront about this. Did you select these participants randomly, systematically, or were they a convenience sample? You will also want to include whether or not the survey design involves stratification of the population before you selected the sample. Make sure you indicate how many people are in the sample. This helps the reader to establish the validity and the credibility of your study. Let me give you an example. I want to know how new adjunct faculty view the training that's available to them at the university. I'm going to use a single-stage sample of participants that are randomly chosen from a list of 500 new adjuncts. From these 500 people, I want to make sure that at least 250 people get the opportunity to participate in the survey. When using a survey design, I also want to make sure that I talk clearly about the instrumentation that will be used to collect the data. This instrument could be created by the researcher, it could be modified from one that has already been created, or it could be developed by someone else entirely and you just receive permission to use it. If you choose to use an instrument that has already been used, talk about its validity and whether or not the scores from past users are reliable. Reliability and validity are two ways to establish that you have a solid study that uses a solid instrument. It's always a good idea to pilot test or field test the survey to get feedback from others and to decide if it needs to be modified before it goes out to your actual sample. If you plan to actually mail out surveys, which actually seems ancient but does yield a bigger return rate in most cases, then you should identify steps for how you're going to administer the survey and follow up to ensure that you get a high response rate. When looking at variables in the study, you will notice that Table 8.2 contains independent variables, dependent variables, a control variable, and a variable that's related to the independent variable. Study this table to see how research questions can be developed using the types of variables and how these can be asked on a survey. When it comes time to analyze and interpret the data, report information about the number of members of the sample who returned the survey and those who did not. Discuss the method that you intend to use to identify if any of the particular participants' responses were biased. Talk about how you plan to analyze that data using all independent and dependent variables. Identify the computer program that you plan to use that will analyze that data and run the numbers for you. Lastly, present the results in a table of figures and interpret them from the statistical test. For example, I might say that out of 250 people surveyed, 175 returned the survey completed. I might also say that the data was analyzed using the SPSS statistical software to help determine the results. If you choose to use an experimental design, in contrast to a survey design, it would follow basically the format of listing participants, materials, procedures, and measures. In the participant section for an experimental design, you would describe the process you use for selecting your participants. This would be random or non-random. If individuals are not randomly assigned, this is called quasi-experimental. A true experiment is one where individuals are randomly assigned, so that the researcher has no control over the actual sample. While these words sound big and complicated, they're all part of the research language that we have to learn to use. Remember that the participant section should also explicitly talk about how you controlled for factors that might have impacted the outcome, as well as talk about the number of people in every group. Your independent and dependent variables should be clearly identified. Remember that your dependent variable is caused by your independent variable. Go back to the situation about study time and scores on a reading test. The time spent studying is the independent variable, where the test score is the dependent variable. This is because this test score depends on the study time. When talking about the instrumentation and materials in an experimental design, you'll want to describe the instrument you used in the study, and you'll want to thoroughly talk about the materials that you used for the experimental treatment. The procedures part of your experimental design will talk about the type of experimental design that you used in your study. These could include pre-experimental, quasi-experimental, true experiments, or single-subject designs. Identify what is being compared in the experiment, as well as use a diagram or a figure to help you illustrate the research design. You want to explain things so clearly that someone could replicate your exact study simply by reading your research methodology section. As with any quantitative research, experimental designs come with internal threats. Internal validity threats are experimental procedures, treatments, or experiences of the participant that threaten the researcher's ability to actually draw inferences or conclusions about the population of an experiment. Some of these are history, maturation, regression, selection, mortality, diffusion of treatment, resentful demoralization, compensatory rivalry, testing, and instrumentation. You can read specific examples of each one of these and how they might apply to a real-life research situation in your text. Please do so that you may gain a better understanding of some internal validity threats. Along with threats to internal validity, there may also be threats to external validity. External validity is when the researcher draws incorrect inferences from the population. Some threats of external validity include interaction of selection and treatment, interaction of setting and treatment, and interaction of history and treatment. Please see the book for explicit examples of how each one of these might look in a research situation. Overall, this quantitative research methods chapter is designed to help you gain a better understanding of what components are required in your research methodology chapter. No matter whether or not you choose a survey design or an experimental design, some things ring true for both. You want to be detailed enough about your design so that someone could replicate your study. This means you need to be specific about how you chose your participants, how you collected your data, how you analyzed your data, and how you prevented threats to validity. You will also need to establish validity and credibility in your instrument and specifically explain how you chose the instrument and why you chose it. Your research methodology should be like an open book where you tell each and everything you did and why you did it. This can be tricky and sometimes time-consuming. I recommend taking it one piece at a time, then rereading that section to see what you left out as far as the steps you took.